The sound of a muffled sob was what made him stop. A sound so faint it was nearly swallowed by the cavernous silence of his own home. It was a sound that didn't belong here, a fragile, poignant note of sadness in a place meticulously designed to perfection. It was a sound that froze the blood in his veins. Arthur Beaumont stood motionless in the grand marble hallway, a space that often felt more like a museum gallery than a home. He had built this monument to his success, a testament to a life of control and order, but such a small sound had just shattered his perfect illusion. He moved slowly, his expensive, hand-stitched leather shoes making no sound on the luxurious Persian rugs that lined the hallway. The sound came from his daughter's playroom, the heavy oak door left ajar, offering a treacherous sliver of a view into a world he was about to realize he didn't know. Through that door, the scene, at first glance, was a portrait of domestic bliss, a carefully constructed and beautiful lie. His new wife, Victoria, knelt on the floor. Her posture was perfect, her expression a mask of maternal devotion as she stroked their daughter Lily's hair with a tenderness that never, for a single second, reached her cold, calculating eyes. But it was the other figure in the room, the one standing silently in the corner, almost a part of the shadows, that revealed the horror. It was the face of the maid, Clara, that told the true story. It was a look of raw, unbridled panic, her eyes wide with a silent plea, a desperate cry for help that Arthur, the powerful millionaire, the master of a global corporation, had been blind to for too long. In that single, heart-stopping moment, he was forced to ask himself a terrifying question. He was the king of that mansion, the master of his own universe. But what really went on behind its polished, closed doors when he wasn't looking? The truth, he would soon discover, was far more monstrous and intricately woven than he could ever have imagined. From the outside, Arthur's mansion was a fortress of wealth, a breathtaking spectacle of imported limestone and vast, glittering windows overlooking 50 acres of impeccably manicured gardens designed to emulate the grand estates of Europe. To the world, it was the symbol of the Beaumont legacy, a home of unimaginable luxury, featured in magazines and talked about in envious circles. But inside, the air was different. The silence was heavy, oppressive, clinging to the expensive furniture and priceless art like a shroud. The air didn't circulate. It stagnated. It was a gilded cage, a beautiful, hollow prison, where a little girl's innocent laughter had been slowly, methodically, and cruelly replaced by a silent, corrosive fear. Through that door, the scene, at first glance, was a portrait of domestic bliss, a carefully constructed and beautiful lie. His new wife, Victoria, knelt on the floor. Her posture was perfect, her expression a mask of maternal devotion as she stroked their daughter Lily's hair with a tenderness that never, for a single second, reached her cold, calculating eyes. But it was the other figure in the room, the one standing silently in the corner, almost a part of the shadows, that revealed the horror. It was the face of the maid, Clara, that told the true story. It was a look of raw, unbridled panic, her eyes wide with a silent plea, a desperate cry for help that Arthur, the powerful millionaire, the master of a global corporation, had been blind to for too long. In that single heart-stopping moment, he was forced to ask himself a terrifying question. He was the king of that mansion, the master of his own universe. But what really went on behind its polished, closed doors when he wasn't looking? The truth, he would soon discover, was far more monstrous and intricately woven than he could ever have imagined. From the outside, Arthur's mansion was a fortress of wealth, a breathtaking spectacle of imported limestone and vast, glittering windows overlooking 50 acres of impeccably manicured gardens designed to emulate the grand estates of Europe. To the world, it was the symbol of the Beaumont legacy, a home of unimaginable luxury, featured in magazines and talked about in envious circles. But inside, the air was different. The silence was heavy, oppressive, clinging to the expensive furniture and priceless art like a shroud. The air didn't circulate, it stagnated. It was a gilded cage, a beautiful hollow prison, where a little girl's innocent laughter had been slowly, methodically, and cruelly replaced by a silent, corrosive fear. It wasn't always this way. Arthur still remembered, in vivid, painful flashes, what the house had been like when his late wife, Amelia, was alive. It had been a home then, full of light and warmth. Amelia's laughter was the true heart of the mansion, echoing through the hallways as she chased Lily, still a child, across the marble floor. The air smelled of her favorite flowers, freesias, and the comforting aroma of the cookies she loved to bake. Amelia had a gift for making the grandest spaces feel intimate and loving. After she was struck by a sudden illness, the light and laughter died with her, leaving behind a silence that Arthur, a man more comfortable with swings than emotions, didn't know how to fill. The house became just that, a home, a cold, empty vessel. Lily, her only daughter, the last precious piece of Amelia, began to change. She walked the halls like a tiny, pale ghost. Her steps, once bold and energetic, became small and hesitant. Her bright, curious eyes, so like her mother's, were now always lowered, as if she feared the contempt that seemed to lurk in every shadow. She didn't run, didn't sing, barely spoke above a whisper. The vibrant spark that had once defined her was being systematically extinguished, day after agonizing day. Arthur had, of course, noticed a dull ache in his chest every time he saw her. But he had convinced himself it was just sadness, a wound that time would eventually heal. He told himself she was a shy, quiet child, still mourning her mother. It was a comforting lie, a narrative that allowed him to retreat into his work, to build his empire ever higher, as if the walls of his success could protect him from the emotional ruins of his own family. Into this void of pain and denial, Victoria emerged. Arthur had met her at a charity gala, a world away from his sterile boardroom. She was a vision of sophistication and empathy. She had listened, her eyes full of understanding, as he spoke hesitantly of Amelia, of his loneliness, of his fears for Lily. She had a way of making him feel seen, of making him believe that happiness was not a thing of the past, but something he could rebuild. She was the architect of his false hope. She promised to restore the light that had been lost, to be a mother to his son, a companion to him. Arthur, starved for connection and overwhelmed by the dual pressures of his empire and his role as a single father, had succumbed to her masterful performance. He had mistaken her iron control for stability, her manipulative charm for genuine affection. He had given her his name, his trust, his home, and most dangerously, access to his daughter. Without knowing it, he had invited the wolf into the fold and given him the keys to the flock. Victoria moved through the mansion like a queen assuming her rightful throne. Her voice was pure silk whenever Arthur was near, her gestures filled with a rehearsed, cinematic grace. But the moment her car disappeared down the long, winding driveway, the mask slipped. The transformation was chilling. Her sweet smile narrowed into a thin, cruel line. Her soft voice dropped to a low, venomous whisper. Her words, once so full of comfort, became meticulously sharpened daggers aimed at the most vulnerable heart of the house. "You're useless!" she hissed, her voice a low, terrifying whisper as Lily struggled to tie her own shoes, her small fingers fumbling with the laces. Completely and utterly useless. Your father deserves so much more than a whiny, pathetic child. Do you have any idea how much you embarrass him? This was her insidious method, humiliation disguised as correction, psychological torture disguised as maternal concern. and it hurt more than any visible wound, leaving deep, invisible scars that festered and deepened with each passing day. The abuse was a constant, quiet hum of terror in Lily's life. If Lily accidentally spilled a drop of milk, Victoria didn't scream. Instead, she forced the child to clean the entire kitchen floor with a tiny cloth, whispering about how disappointed her biological mother would be. If Lily received a subpar grade on a school assignment, Victoria took away her favorite books, telling her that privileges were for children smart enough to deserve them. Clara, the maid, saw it all. She had worked with the Beaumont family for years, hired by the warm and gentle Amelia, and remembered a time when the house was a sanctuary. Now, she felt like a helpless observer in a horror story. She tried to bring a remnant of that former warmth back to a home that had become cold as a tomb. She was the silent witness, the guardian angel in the shadows. Her long tenure and reserved demeanor made her virtually invisible to Victoria, a part of the furniture, and it was from this neglected vantage point that she saw the full extent of calculated cruelty. She was always watching over Lily, ready with a glass of water to soothe a stifled sob, a quiet, comforting hug in an empty hallway, a whispered word of comfort when Victoria's back was turned. "You are good, you are kind, you are much loved," she murmured into Lily's hair, her words a desperate shield against the venom pouring into the child's ears. Clara's heart ached with a familiar, crushing pain. Years before, a rain-slicked road and a drunk driver had stolen her husband and 5-year-old son, leaving a gaping hole in her life that could never be filled. In Lily's innocent, frightened eyes, she saw the same precious light that had once lived in her son's. Her instinct to protect that child was fierce, primal, a sacred duty. It was a promise she had made to her son's memory, to shield this little girl from the kind of darkness her own son, mercifully, had never known. This quiet, fierce devotion, however, did not go unnoticed. Victoria saw the growing bond between the maid and the child and recognized it not as kindness, but as an intolerable threat to her absolute authority. Clara became an obstacle to be removed. The terror campaign was subtle at first, a series of small cruelties designed to isolate and demoralize Lily and to slowly poison Arthur's perception of his own daughter. The birthday party was a masterclass in Victoria's methods. For Lily's 7th birthday, Victoria threw a lavish party that was featured on a society blog, but she didn't invite any of Lily's real friends from school. Instead, the guests were her own friends, children, aggressive, spoiled brats who ignored Lily and broke her new toys. Victoria dressed Lily in an expensive but stiff and uncomfortable dress that scratched her skin, making it impossible for her to change. Lily spent the entire party on the verge of tears, looking small and miserable. Victoria, of course, captured this on camera. Later that night, she showed the photos to Arthur with a sigh. "And I tried so hard, darling," she said, her voice thick with disappointment, "but she's such a difficult child, so ungrateful. I just don't know what to do with her." Clara was the one who later found Lily crying in her closet and secretly brought her a plain cupcake with a single candle, a small, precious gift she held tightly. They celebrated Lily's real birthday in whispers, a small act of rebellion. Then came the slow, methodical isolation. Amelia's sister, a kind woman named Eleanor, used to visit her frequently. She was the first to notice the change. During one visit, she found Lily hiding in the garden, refusing to come in. "She seems terrified of Victoria," Eleanor later told Arthur, her tone hushed and worried. "Something's not right here, Arthur," Victoria heard. The following week, Victoria staged a scene in which she discovered Eleanor rummaging through the drawers of her private desk. She accused Eleanor of being self-serving, of trying to turn Arthur against her. Confused and manipulated, Arthur found himself defending his new wife, creating a rift with the only family he had left. Eleanor's visits ceased, The last line of defense was gone. Clara watched it all unfold, her heart heavy with fear. She responded the only way she could, with small, defiant acts of love. She and Lily developed a secret language, a silent code. A light tug on her ear meant, "I'm scared." A quick double handshake meant, "I'm here, be brave." In a forgotten corner of the vast gardens, hidden behind a thicket of overgrown rose bushes, they started a small secret garden. It was their sanctuary, a place where they planted wildflowers and whispered secrets, a small patch of land free from Victoria's tyranny. It was there that Clara told Lily stories about her own son, about his bravery and his laughter, and by sharing her pain, she gave Lily the strength to bear her own. One morning, the tension finally boiled over into a public display of power. Clara, knowing Arthur particularly enjoyed fresh orange juice, had prepared a beautiful breakfast tray and was carrying it to the dining room. As she passed through the foyer, Victoria deliberately stuck out her foot. Clara tripped, and the entire tray fell to the marble floor in an explosion of glass, porcelain, and orange juice. "My God, you are incredibly clumsy," Victoria cried, just as Arthur descended the grand staircase. "Arthur, darling, I don't know how much more of this incompetence I can tolerate. She's a menace." Arthur rushed downstairs, his face a mask of concern. He saw the mess, saw Victoria's feigned distress, and saw Clara on all fours, silently picking up the pieces, her face pale with humiliation, a small cut on her hand already bleeding. "It was an accident, sir," Clara whispered, not daring to look at him. "Of course," Arthur said, his voice softer than Victoria would have liked. He helped Clara to her feet, staring at her for a moment. He didn't see incompetence, but a deep, profound sadness. It was another crack in the perfect facade, another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. I was beginning to see the pattern, but I still couldn't believe the terrifying picture that was forming. Victoria, sensing his hesitation, knew she needed to intensify her campaign against Clara. That night, in the privacy of her opulent bedroom, she approached Arthur with an expression of deep, troubled concern. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper. "And darling, I'm so worried about Clara. I know you admire her bond with Lily, but have you ever considered why she's so attached?" Arthur looked up from his papers, frowning. "What are you talking about, Victoria?" "It's just, don't forget, Arthur, that she lost her husband and son in that terrible accident," she said, her voice thick with false compassion. "Grief can do strange things to a person. A trauma like that can make someone unstable. Don't you think she might be trying to replace what she lost? Don't you think she might see Lily as a second chance?" She let the venomous words hang in the air, allowing them to seep into Arthur's mind. She knows what it's like to lose everything. A woman so desperate, she would do anything to not feel that pain again, even take away a child that isn't hers. The insinuation was monstrous, a seed of pure evil. It took root in Arthur's mind, a terrifying possibility he couldn't shake. His growing trust in Clara was now tainted by a new and terrible suspicion. He began to watch her, analyzing her every move, searching for signs of the instability Victoria had so masterfully described. He was being transformed into the guardian of his own home, and Victoria was the one handing him the keys. Victoria, sensing her advantage, knew it was time to deliver the final, crushing blow. She waited for the perfect opportunity. A major fundraiser Arthur was hosting at the mansion, an event attended by the city's most powerful and influential people. A week before the event, she began to organize, casually mentioning to Arthur that a few small, insignificant items, a bottle of expensive perfume, a small amount of cash from her purse, had gone missing. "Oh, it's probably nothing," she would say with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm sure I lost them." I wouldn't want to accuse any of the staff. She was laying the groundwork, setting a precedent for theft. On the afternoon of the ball, while the house was bustling with caterers and florists, Victoria called Clara into her dressing room under the pretense of needing help with some decorative boxes. As Clara bent down to lift a heavy container, Victoria, with a sleight of hand worthy of a professional magician, slipped a pair of her most prized diamond earrings, a gift from Arthur, recognized by everyone in their circle, into Clara's deep apron pocket. Later that night, in the midst of the glittering party, Victoria let out a theatrical gasp that cut through the murmur of conversation. "My earrings! My diamond earrings from Arthur! They're gone!" A frantic public search began. Victoria, with an expression of growing horror, pointed a trembling finger at Clara, who was pouring champagne nearby. "Her," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. She was the only one in my room this afternoon. With all eyes on them, Victoria walked over to Clara, mortified. "I'm sorry I have to do this," she said, her voice choked with false regret. She reached into Clara's apron pocket and, with a dramatic gesture, pulled out her sparkling earrings. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The humiliation was absolute, a public execution of her character. Clara stood paralyzed, the blood draining from her face, unable to speak as dozens of eyes stared at her, judging her, condemning her. Arthur felt a wave of shame and confusion so profound it made him dizzy. Part of him screamed that this was impossible, that the kind, gentle woman he knew could never do it, but the evidence was there, shining in Victoria's hand, and her venomous words about Clara's desperation echoed in his ears. But as the storm of lies engulfed her, Clara didn't look at Arthur. She didn't look at Victoria. She looked at Lily, who watched from the top of the stairs, her little face a mask of terror. At that moment, Lily did something extraordinary. She pushed through the crowd of adults, her little party dress a blur of motion, ran to Clara and wrapped her small arms around her legs, holding her as if she were in danger. She looked at her father, her eyes burning with a fire he hadn't seen in years. "She didn't do it, Daddy," Lily cried, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom. "Victoria is lying. She's always lying." Her daughter's unshakable, absolute trust was the one thing Victoria hadn't planned for. For Arthur, it was like a bolt from the blue, illuminating everything. The stage falls, the missing staff, her daughter's fear, Eleanor's warnings, everything began to connect, forming a single, terrifying picture. The truth struggled to break free, and the very foundations of the house were about to crumble. But before Arthur could act, Victoria took over, citing the trauma of the event and the need for safety. She insisted that Arthur leave for the business trip planned for the next. "I'll take care of it, darling," she whispered. "Let me take care of the discomfort." Reluctantly, and with his heart heavy with a terrible, unformed doubt, Arthur agreed, making a fatal mistake. He thought he needed time to think, to process, but what he was really doing was leaving his daughter alone with the monster. As soon as his car was out of sight, Victoria's revenge was swift and brutal. She didn't just fire Clara, she destroyed her. She called her into her office, her face cold and triumphant. "You are finished," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You will pack a small suitcase with only your personal belongings. You will leave this property immediately. If you ever set foot here again, if you try to contact Arthur or that pathetic child again, I will not only call the police and charge you with theft, but I will also ensure that you are ruined in ways you cannot even imagine. I will personally call every agency in this city and tell them that you are a deranged, untrustworthy thief. You will never work again." Clara fought back tears, knowing that showing any weakness would only fuel the monster before her. She faced Victoria with a quiet strength that infuriated the other woman. "You can win today," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "But the truth always comes out eventually." Not when I'm the one writing the story, Victoria scoffed back. Lily watched from a hidden spot in the hallway as Clara was escorted out like a criminal. She saw her protector, her only friend, taken away, and a part of her broke. She hugged Clara frantically and tearfully in the service entrance, her small heart breaking under the weight of the injustice. With Clara gone, Victoria's last bit of control vanished. Her cruelty, no longer needing to be hidden, turned fully and relentlessly on Lily. The little girl was subjected to a grueling routine of harsh orders, constant criticism, and cruel, cutting remarks about her late mother. "Your mother was weak," Victoria would say. "That's why she left you, but I will make you strong. I will burn that weakness out of you." To Arthur, who called every night, Victoria told a masterful story. She told him that after the earring incident, Clara had been overcome with shame and quit her job, deciding to move away and start a new life. She crafted a narrative of a woman who simply disappeared, leaving them behind. Every word was carefully chosen to sound sincere, to hide the malice behind her false maternal concern. When Arthur returned a week later, the house was deathly silent. The light seemed to have been sucked out. Victoria greeted him with a dark, rehearsed smile, telling her fabricated story. The news that Clara had not just left them, but abandoned them, hit Arthur like a physical blow. He remembered the quiet moments of connection, the way her presence seemed to calm the chaos in his own heart. The memory of her gentle smile now felt like a ghost, haunting him, leaving a cold, empty void that Victoria's false affection couldn't fill. He found Lily in her room, curled up on the bed, staring blankly at the wall. Her spark, which had briefly returned, had completely disappeared. She was a doll, hollowed out inside. He tried to comfort her, but his words were futile. The bond between father and daughter, already frayed, was now on the verge of rupture due to the absence of the only woman who had truly understood them. Clara, however, had not disappeared. She had taken refuge in a tiny, run-down apartment on the other side of town, her heart tangled with grief and fury. Victoria had been true to her word. Every employment agency she had called had rejected her. She was blacklisted. The injustice burned within her. Every night she closed her eyes and saw Lily's terrified face, and her resolve hardened like steel. She would not be defeated. She would not let that little girl suffer. She began to plan, her mind sharp and focused. She knew she could not face Victoria with words alone. She needed irrefutable proof, a weapon so powerful it would shatter Victoria's reign of lies forever. She reached out to the old cook and the gardener, meeting them in secret. They shared their stories, each a piece of the same ugly puzzle. They formed a small, unlikely alliance, united by their love for Lily and their hatred for the woman who had hurt her. Days turned into weeks. At the mansion, Arthur's doubts turned into a gnawing certainty that something was terribly wrong. He was awake now, and he saw everything. He saw how Lily flinched whenever Victoria entered a room. He noticed that small, valuable items belonging to his late wife were disappearing, only for Victoria to later claim she had kept them for safekeeping. He began investigating. He discreetly called Amelia's sister, Eleanor, and apologized, listening for hours as she recounted her own disturbing experiences with Victoria. He began examining financial records and noticed Victoria's extravagant, almost frenzied, spending. He began searching his own house like a detective, and in a dusty box at the back of Lily's closet, he found a collection of her drawings. They were dark and disturbing. One showed a small girl crying and a tall, smiling woman with sharp, pointy teeth. It was a child's cry for help, drawn in crayon. Clara knew it was time. She had gathered her evidence, written, notarized statements from the fired cook and gardener, detailing Victoria's lies and manipulations, and she had her trump card. On the day she was fired, in a moment of desperate foresight, she managed to activate a small audio recorder on her phone and place it in a decorative plant in the living room. She retrieved it days later, risking everything to sneak back to the property in the dead of night. It had captured hours of Victoria's venomous tirades against Lily. It was the truth, undeniable and raw. She returned to the mansion, not as a servant, but as a warrior. She didn't use the service entrance. She walked straight to the grand front door and rang the bell. When a surprised butler answered, she walked past him, head held high. She found them in the living room. Victoria was in the middle of scolding Lily for spilling a drop of juice on the carpet, her voice harsh and cruel. "You're a disgrace, clumsy and stupid." "Enough," said a voice, clear and firm. Victoria turned, her face contorted in anger and disbelief as she saw Clara standing there. "What are you doing here? I told you never to come back. I'll arrest you for trespassing." But before she could continue, Lily let out a cry of pure joy and ran across the room, throwing herself into Clara's arms. "You're back! I knew you would," she sobbed. That was all the confirmation Arthur needed. As he contemplated the pure, genuine love between his daughter and this woman, the last vestiges of Victoria's venom were purged from his mind. He saw the truth. "Get out of my house!" Victoria yelled at Clara. "It's not your house," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. He walked over to stand beside Clara and Lily, forming a united front. "And I think it's time you started talking, Victoria. The real story this time." "She's a thief and a liar," Victoria screamed, trying to manipulate him one last time. "She's a disturbed woman obsessed with our daughter." "No," Clara said calmly. She pulled her phone from her pocket. "You are." She pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Victoria's voice, cold and hateful, spewing insults and threats at a crying Lily. "Your mother was weak. You're a burden. No one would ever want you if it weren't for your father's money." Every lie, every cruel manipulation was laid bare for Arthur to hear. The sound was a verdict and a confession all at once. The colour drained from Victoria's face. She looked from the phone to Arthur's, which had become a mask of cold, implacable fury. She saw no mercy there. Her reign was over. She tried to scream, to threaten, to deny, but her power had evaporated. Humiliated and exposed, she stormed out of the mansion, a dethroned queen of her stolen kingdom. The oppressive silence she had cultivated was finally broken, replaced by Lily's happy, relieved laughter. Arthur turned to Clara, his eyes filled with profound gratitude and a deep, agonizing shame at his own blindness. He took her hand firmly. "Can you ever forgive me?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Clara looked at him, then at the little girl clinging to her, her face buried in his side, and smiled. A sincere, warm smile that reached her eyes. "There's nothing to forgive. We just need to heal." The healing began that day. The mansion, once a cold, sterile museum, slowly transformed back into a home. Laughter, hesitant at first, then joyful and free, began to echo through the hallways. The aroma of baking cookies, made from Clara's secret magic recipe, filled the kitchen. Arthur relearned how to be a father, present and attentive. He cancelled meetings to take Lily to the park. He read her bedtime stories every night. He learned to listen, to truly listen, to the silent whispers of his daughter's heart, and the light, slowly but surely, returned to Lily's eyes. 3 months later, Arthur and Clara stood before an altar erected in the sun-drenched garden, in the same spot where Clara and Lily tended their secret wildflower patch. They were to be married. It was a small, intimate ceremony, not a grand social event. The only guests were true friends, those who had supported them, like Eleanor and the old cook and gardener. Lily, as flower girl, tossed petals with unbridled joy. Her smile the brightest thing present. It was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of survival, of a family renewed in the fire of betrayal. It felt like the perfect ending. But evil does not surrender so easily. Victoria, living in a small rented apartment, her assets frozen during the divorce proceedings, watched from afar. Consumed by a venomous, obsessive rage, she was unwilling to accept defeat. She planned one last desperate act of revenge, hiring a disgruntled former employee of Arthur's to sabotage the brakes of the wedding car that was supposed to take the happy family away. She wanted to destroy Arthur's happiness the same way he had destroyed hers, in a storm of twisted metal and shards of glass. Her plan, however, backfired spectacularly. The man she hired, hesitating at the last moment, confessed everything to the security team Arthur had wisely kept on site. The police were waiting for Victoria at her apartment, facing a long prison sentence for conspiracy to commit murder. Her carefully constructed world came crashing down around her. Her face was on the news, not as a society queen, but as a bitter and vengeful criminal. She would finally face the consequences of her cruelty, not in a mansion, but in a cold, sterile cell. With the threat of Victoria gone forever, a final and lasting peace settled over the family. Their joy was complete, untainted by fear. Their lives were a testament to a simple and powerful truth, that even in the face of the most calculated darkness, the simple forces of love, truth, and courage will always, in the end, triumph. And now, I want to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments if you've ever met someone as manipulative as Victoria and which city you're watching from. If you enjoyed this powerful story of justice and family, don't forget to like and follow our channel for more moving and dramatic stories that will touch your heart.